Hi, welcome to SoulTalk, broadcasting live from Ascent, a beautiful Jewish youth hostel here in the holy city of Tzfat. So this is the talk of the Rebbe 5750, which is Tafshin Nun. And effectively, the Rebbe said in Parshas Vayera, he asked an interesting question, which is, how come Avraham Avinu felt pain? We know, in fact, I once had to give a lecture. A friend of mine runs the Pain Association of Kansas City, and so we created a little event, and people came. It was quite nice, and so I gave a lecture, and my lecture was the idea that pain and pleasure are opposites. You know, a lot of times, really, one of the greatest, if I can call it, stupidities of what used to be psychology, hopefully it's advanced, was the idea of looking at the problem. You know, the Tzemach Tzedek says that looking at the problem is to increase the problem. He says a thought is like putting something on the stove. You know, the longer you're going to cook it, the more cooked it's going to get. So the more you think about, let's say somebody made you upset, the more upset you're going to get. So it's really quite foolish to look at emotions and think, oh, wow, I need to deal with this emotion. Sometimes the best thing to do is not to deal with the emotion, to move on. You know, maturity is not rehashing the same movie in your head. Maturity is deciding which movie to play in your head. And Avraham Avinu should have been so excited. This was his first mitzvah from Hashem to get the bris milah, that this excitement would take away any type of, in any way, shape, or form, any type of upsetness. So the Rebbe explains, in truth, he wasn't feeling the pain of a lack of a physical, you know, in Jewish mysticism, pain is associated to loss. When we lose something, we feel pain. When you lose a relationship, a love, that can be very painful, so it's loss. And in fact, happiness is associated to gain. You know, oh, you just won the lotto. What did you get? Well, you just had a gain. So, and it's all relative, you know. As one man once told me, one man's ceiling is another man's floor. You know, pain and loss, if it's relationship-wise, it's obviously related to the individual. But if it's monetarily wise, you know, if a billionaire lost $100 million, it's not a big deal. If somebody, I don't know, who doesn't have any money lost $5, it's a big deal. So everything is kind of quite relative, which is why it's quite foolish to look at the world. And my father once told me that in what's called klippa, in the realm of darkness, if you want to call it that, everything is about amounts. Who has more, who has less. It's about more or less. But that's a very foolish thing, as is a story with the Reb Marash, where his son was once measuring the matzah, which matzah is larger. He says something that gets measured against something else isn't really larger. You know, if you say, oh, wow, this is bigger than that. Yeah, but it's not really bigger, essentially, because relative to that, it's smaller. So these are relative terms. It's really kind of the theory of Einstein, which is the concept of relativity, that everything's just relative. These are experiences. Like when they asked him to explain relativity for the layperson, he said, you know, if you were to sit on a hot stove for a minute, it would feel like an hour. If you'd have a great conversation, an hour would feel like a minute. So getting back to the core point, which is that what was the desire of Avraham Avinu was for godliness, the revelation of God. And that's why this week's parsha is actually Vayera. God appears to him, and that is the solution. In heaven, the concept of kind of being sick, they call it love sick. You know, you really, really want something that you don't get. That is kind of like an illness. You feel ill. So there's that love sick. And then if you actually get it, then there's that, wow, that feeling of connection. That's why relationships, particularly between male and females, are so beautiful, because really we're one soul in two halves. And therefore, when we come together, there's that feeling of connection, which is why separation is such a great loss as well. So in conclusion, what the Rebbe is teaching us is that the concept of the mitzvah of milah is the idea that God can really descend into us. Now, we're really in the beginning stages of Mashiach. I've written a number of books, one of them, the Rebbe on Mashiach, everything the Rebbe said and published last year. And it's very clear that the Rebbe believes that Mashiach has already begun. And the reason for that is because the ultimate idea of Mashiach is the connection of God within the human being. That is what Mashiach is about. So when you can integrate, and that's the idea of the bris, the integration of God actually descending within and being comfortable with that descent as well. Not only has God descended, but being able to be yourself. As I told a friend of mine today, the whole idea of spirituality is not that we're leaving this world, but we're allowing godliness to permeate this world. So the initial thing that happened in this world was the pulsation. The original light was pulsating, was the pulsation. I heard this from my Uncle Levi when he came to speak at our hometown, Kansas City. So it was a pulse of light. And it was pulsating between light and darkness. And that's really what the world is all about. If you think you know what reality is, it's a sign that you don't know it, because it pulsates. Literally everything physically pulsates into existence from the non-existent state all the time. It's a fact of quantum physics spoken about in Kabbalah thousands of years ago. So the idea is that we are also pulsating in spiritual wisdom. And it's all about, and I heard this from Rabbi Simon Jacobson based on the Alter Rebbe, it's really all about the concept of revelation and concealment, something that I blogged today, which is everything is a question of how much you reveal, how much you conceal. So God initially conceals himself so we could be revealed, we can kind of exist. But then in the concealment, he now has infinite ability to come say, oh, let's look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this. And that's what life is, as Rabbi Tzvi Freeman writes, it's God's classroom without walls. Every moment, and it's really the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, we're in God. Everything is in God, and we're just learning more and more, moment to moment. And that's really the goal of life. On one hand, to have your feet grounded on the ground, that you should be in this realm, in this reality. You should completely be engaged in life, not to disassociate, disconnect, but to engage with it in its pains and its pleasures. And then to allow the Spirit of God, which hovers, which was always here, which is always here, to guide you. Allow God to be your personal guide, and be comfortable. When Mashiach comes, it says that we will actually, listen to this, the spiritual realm will be as normal as the physical realm. Just as you can see me, that's normal to you, hearing the voice of God, being accustomed to the voice of God, following the voice of God, all of these things will be basically the way we function. And many people are there already. And so it's just a matter of being there too. So you too can enter into the dimension of Mashiach and please God from us undertaking to live in the Mashiach mindset and dimension, then the ultimate good, which is the resurrection of the dead and the third Beis HaMikdash, and literally, clouds coming, bringing all the Jews back to Israel. We will have total clarity and peace. We will all be living together with ourselves, with one another, and with God forever. It's the completion of all that is good.